Hey friends, tonight we ease into the flickering silence of a forgotten workshop, tucked behind timber-bird walls in the city of Mainz, sometime in the middle of the 15th century. Outside, the cobbled streets are slick with rain, the windows of nearby homes glowing dimly with candlelight. But here, behind a warped wooden door, something is stirring. The air is thick with the scent of damp vellum, warm wax, and hot metal. Somewhere in the shadows, a drop of ink falls silent, almost sacred. You step carefully over floorboards that creak beneath your weight. Your fingers brush against iron rods and wooden frames, still warm from the forge, still soft from use. This workshop feels modest, even makeshift, but history is holding its breath here. This is no ordinary room. This is the beating heart of a quiet revolution. In one corner, half shrouded beneath linen cloth, stands a machine that will reshape the world in whispers. It's Johann Gutenberg's press, not yet complete, its lever loose, its screws still uncertain, but waiting for the first pull, the first push, the first proof. You can almost hear the echo of a future not yet written, murmuring between stacked sheets of vellum, between dusty windows and forgotten tools. It's odd to think of it now, when ideas fly across oceans in milliseconds, that this moment, this room with its flickering lantern and rough beams, was the origin of something seismic. Before this, a book was a miracle, a labor of years. Scribes hunched over parchment, quills dipped in ink, recreating each letter with aching reverence. To copy the Bible by hand might take 3 years if you were fast. 3 years of blots, mistakes, skipped lines, and sleepy hands. And here, in this damp room, metal letters are being lined up like puzzle pieces, locked in place with care. Words no longer had to flow from feather to page. Now they could be stamped into the world again and again. But before we go further into the story, take a moment. If you're enjoying the feeling of slipping into the past like this, consider liking the video and subscribing. Not out of habit, but because it supports this shared quiet space we've made here. And tell me, where are you listening from tonight? Is it morning where you are? Or a stormy night? A sleepy cafe in Lisbon, maybe? Or the hum of an old fan in a Tokyo apartment? Gutenberg's press connected the world once through pages. We can do the same, if only for this story. So, dim the lights. Let the room grow softer. Maybe turn on a small fan to add a quiet breeze to the background. Let's settle into the moment together. You reach for a freshly printed page. The paper is rough, thick like cloth. The ink hasn't dried entirely. It smudges slightly beneath your thumb, leaving a faint mark, a minor flaw. Gutenberg would have noticed, maybe even cursed it. But it's this imperfection that makes the moment feel real. This wasn't just about speed. It was about tactility, about how printed words pressed into the paper, how the surface changed under pressure. Where handwritten letters glided atop the fibers, printed type sank in just slightly, but enough to stay. Historians often praise Gutenberg for the rapid reproduction of texts. But the more poetic truth lies in something quieter, consistency. Before the press, no two copies of a book were ever truly the same. A sleepy monk might skip a line. A second scribe might embellish a margin. Books weren't just texts, they were expressions. But now, for the first time, 2 Bibles could look exactly the same, identical, as if printed truth had stepped out of the subjective fog of human hands. And yet, of course, even these printed pages had their personalities. A blot here, a faint press there. Sometimes, a single upside-down letter would slip into the line, or the inky thumbprint of an apprentice in the corner. The press promised uniformity, but delivered something far more charming. Controlled imperfection. Repetition with room for nuance. Mechanized memory still softened by human touch. And here is a little-known fact. Gutenberg's earliest print runs weren't Bibles at all. They were indulgences, slips of paper sold by the church that promised to shave time off, one stay in purgatory. Forgiveness, printed in black ink. A divine shortcut, assembled on the world's first spiritual assembly line. Before literature, before scripture, there was commerce. The machinery of belief, humming quietly in this room. You lean in, peering at a test sheet lit by candlelight. The Gothic type glints faintly in the glow, each character sharp and ornate. The letters seem to shift ever so slightly in the uneven light and illusion, surely, but one that might have felt like magic to readers of the day. Imagine living in a world where books were rarer than gold, and then, suddenly, they multiply. Did Gutenberg invent the press? Some argue not exactly. Block printing had existed for centuries in China. The screw press was already used for crushing grapes or olives. What Gutenberg did, what makes him brilliant, was less about invention and more about combination. He fused metallurgy, mechanics, and typography into something modular, reusable, flexible. Movable type, the original open-source system. Letters that could be arranged, taken apart, and reassembled into anything. Into everything. The ink in this room smells faintly metallic like a struck match or old coins. The type is made from an alloy of lead, tin, and antimony, each character cast in small, identical molds. Gutenberg didn't just dream up the press. He engineered every piece. Even the ink had to be thicker, oil-based, to stick to the metal and bite into the paper. Every problem solved in silence. It's easy to forget how physical this revolution was. The noise of type slotted into its frame. The crack of the lever pulled down. The ache in your back after a day of printing. The black dust in your fingerprints, impossible to wash out. The press didn't just change minds, it changed bodies. Knowledge became labor. And labor, knowledge. Now close your eyes, just for a second, and imagine someone holding a printed book for the very first time. The weight of it, the smoothness of the type, the identical pages. There would be awe, yes, but also suspicion. Something that regular must be unnatural. For the first time, words had no visible author. The trembling hand was gone. This, some say, was the beginning of modernity, not because we could mass-produce ideas, but because ideas could now float free of their creators. Ideas could become anonymous, shared, lasting. Outside, the city of Mainz slumbers on. The wind rattles a shutter. A dog barks in the distance. The town has no idea what's unfolding in this room. This press, this first humming prototype, will multiply. It will spread across borders like ivy. It will whisper into every language. It will print revolutions, psalms, recipes, fairy tales. But for now, it is only one machine. Only a few pages. Only the beginning. The scent is the first thing that greets you. Not quite pleasant, but unmistakably alive. A strange mix of molten lead, warm beeswax, and the sharp tongue of vinegar used to clean the type. It clings to your nostrils, earthy and metallic, as though even the air here remembers that history was forged in flame. You've stepped into the workshop of Johannes Gutenberg, not the polished inventor of textbooks, but the man amid chaos and fumes, surrounded by half-made parts and chalk-smeared blueprints. This isn't a clean laboratory of innovation. It's a dim, shadowy cave of trial and error, where every surface bears witness to years of silent struggle. You move slowly through the room, careful not to brush against anything too freshly cooled. Your fingertips graze a long wooden workbench dented from the relentless tapping of hammers. The wood is stained here with old ink, there with wax drippings hardened into small brown coins. The floor creaks beneath your steps. Somewhere in the corner, a small iron furnace hums like a sleeping dragon. Inside, metal simmers hot, restless, silvery bright in the firelight. It's here, in this quiet crucible, that one of history's great transformations is taking place. Lead into language, heat into permanence, noise into thought. This was not a place of open invention. Gutenberg operated under tight secrecy, shielding his work from spies, rivals, and even, to some degree, his own collaborators. The workshop felt more like a hidden lab or a modern-day startup carefully cloaked, full of half-truths and locked drawers. He had funding. Of course, his financier was Johann Fust, a wealthy man who would later turn sour and sue Gutenberg for missed deadlines. In many ways, it became one of the earliest examples of venture capital drama. The terms weren't just financial, they were personal. Behind every drop of ink was a ticking clock. There's a reason Gutenberg chose Mainz. The city pulsed with skilled goldsmiths, metalworkers, and engravers. He borrowed from their traditions techniques honed for chalices and jewelry to mold letter forms instead. Imagine telling one of those artisans that the delicate curls they once carved into holy relics would soon decorate indulgence slips, bawdy poems, or theological manifestos. The sacred turned reproducible. You crouch now to examine a discarded brass mold, its once sharp edges dulled by use. Each of these was a building block in a deceptively elegant process. First, you carved a steel master of a letter. That was pressed into soft copper to form a matrix, a kind of inverse stamp. Into that space, molten lead would be poured, cooled, trimmed. Over and over. The system was ingenious, repeatable, modular. Yet perfection required patience bordering on obsession. If the matrix was even slightly misaligned, the entire page would tilt. If the lead was too hot or too cold, the character would come out misshapen. There were no measuring tools as we know them now. Gutenberg worked by instinct-calibrated hands, trained eyes, and countless revisions. But Gutenberg didn't work alone. This fact often fades behind the myth of the solitary genius. The truth is more textured. A nephew, perhaps, was among the workers. Recent analysis of early type specimens suggests that multiple hands were involved in the design process. At least 3 distinct styles of letter carving have been identified, which means the invention was collaborative. The press may have printed uniformity, but it was born from diversity. It is one of the oldest myths we still tell about invention, that it comes from one mind in isolation. In reality, it came from a workshop like this, filled with half-shared ideas, borrowed skills, and patient repetition. Pinned along the back wall are parchment scraps test prints, marked with notes and corrections. Some bear impressions of misaligned letters, the faint double shadows of type that slipped mid-press. These weren't discarded as failures. They were kept, studied, annotated. Every blot and blur became part of a growing knowledge base. The workshop wasn't just a factory. It was an R&D lab centuries ahead of its time. Mistakes weren't just accepted. They were invited. They taught. In one corner, a deeper stain marks the place where ink mixing occurred. Ink was one of the biggest technical hurdles. It had to cling to metal type without dripping, transfer cleanly to paper, dry evenly, and resist smudging. The recipe was part science, part superstition. Linseed oil, soot, and walnut gall were common ingredients, stirred together in thick batches that blackened the hands for days. Some craftsmen swore that ink behaved differently depending on the phase of the moon. Full moons made it too runny. New moons too thick. Modern scholars debate whether this was superstition or an intuitive understanding of humidity, temperature, and timing. A quiet breeze stirs the proof sheets hanging to dry. As they sway, you catch sight of fingerprints, some light, others deeply impressed into the margins. These were not Gutenberg's. They belonged to his assistants, whose names have disappeared, but whose traces remain pressed into the work like medieval metadata. In some cases, forensic historians have found the same prints across different books, suggesting that certain apprentices stayed on for years, leaving behind an invisible signature as constant as the colophon. On a low shelf, you find a stack of coined small wooden or metal wedges used to lock the rows of type into a chase. They look like children's blocks, harmless and simple. But their function was critical. Without them, the type would collapse under the press's pressure. With them, the layout held strong even under forces reaching 1,000 pounds per square inch. That same principle would one day support bridges and skyscrapers. But here, it kept the lowercase as from bouncing out of line. Despite all this machinery, perhaps the most revolutionary aspect of the workshop was its silence. Unlike a smithy or a scriptorium, printing required a strange stillness. No loud banging, no spoken instructions. Just the quiet press of type into paper, the soft clack of alignment, the hushed scraping of excess ink, a revolution whispered into being. Gutenberg's press wasn't just mechanical, it was meditative. And now, as you prepare to leave this moment in time, one more detail lingers. We have no surviving physical trace of Gutenberg's original press. The machine that sparked centuries of intellectual transformation was likely dismantled, melted down, or reused. All we have are Echo's documents, books, and a few notes. Some believe that's fitting. The press was never meant to be a relic. It was always meant to move, to evolve, to be replicated. Like the ideas it spread, it was designed not for preservation, but for proliferation. As you step into the night outside the workshop, Mainz sleeps. But something has shifted in the air. In that cramped room, metal learned to speak. Ink found permanence. And words once caged by candlelight began to fly. You find yourself in the corner of a quiet workshop, your hand brushing slowly across the edge of an old type case. The wood is worn smooth in some places, splintered in others, a record of generations who reached for letters with ink-stained fingers and unblinking concentration. Your fingertips linger over the subtle ridges and grooves, shallow impressions where small drawers have been opened and shut 1,000 times, always in the same rhythm. This box, with its neat wooden grid, doesn't just hold objects. It holds an entire alphabet, broken down into tiny soldiers of lead and antimony. Dozens of us sleep side by side. Lines of RS stand at attention. A small army of thought, waiting to be called into formation. Here, language became physical. Not metaphor, but metal. Ideas you could hold in the palm of your hand like seeds, ready to be planted in the fields of paper. In this space, sentences were no longer imagined or recited. They were assembled, line by line, word by word, letter by letter. The dance of movable type was far more intricate than it first appeared. Each piece of type had to be cast as a mirror image, backwards and upside down, so that, once inked and pressed to paper, it would emerge facing the right direction. It sounds simple in theory. In practice, it required the visual spatial awareness of a sculptor and the reflexes of a musician. Early printers developed a kind of mental map, a muscle memory so refined they could reach for a lowercase e or an uppercase G without looking. Their hands learned what their eyes barely registered. To work in type was to think in reverse. Designers today rely on digital precision, vector curves, and endlessly editable layouts. But the artisans of Gutenberg's world had no such luxuries. Every curve of every letter was shaped by file and fire. Their goal wasn't just utility, but familiarity. Early printed letters often imitated the elegant loops and strong verticals of handwritten manuscripts. This visual camouflage helped readers accept the printed page. Historians have called it the incunabula deception, the press pretending to be a scribe. In a world where tradition was sacred, innovation wore a disguise. There's another detail easily overlooked: punctuation, or rather, its absence. Gutenberg's early type contained no punctuation marks in the modern sense. Periods, commas, and quotation marks, as we know them, were still decades, even centuries, from standardization. Readers encountered a forest of slashes, dots, and arcane symbols, many inherited from medieval abbreviations. A simple diagonal slash could mean pause, breath, decimal point, or something else entirely depending on the day, the region, or the mood of the typesetter. Reading a page was an act of intuition, not just comprehension. And somehow, people managed. You pick up a single letter from the case of lowercase e, the humble backbone of the Latin alphabet. It's heavier than expected, solid, square-edged, and cool to the touch. This one letter would have been cast by the hundreds, even thousands, because it appears more often than any other. Printers affectionately called ease the mice, always scurrying into words, always in demand. Each piece would have been adjusted by hand, filed down slightly to ensure a perfect fit in the line. Some apprentices became so weary of the process that they would accept slightly uneven spacing rather than recast a paragraph. It's a quiet rebellion, the choice to let imperfection slip through, to trust the reader's eye, to forgive a margin gone crooked. But the real alchemy of the print shop was in the layout of the case itself. Long before the modern California job case standardized the placement of every letter, early printers followed their own logic, some sorted alphabetically, others by frequency, and a few followed patterns lost to time. One surviving document from a Mainz workshop shows that all vowels were kept together, described poetically as hens in a coop, while consonants were stored around them like foxes circling outside. Each shop developed its own rhythm, its own language, within the language, a secret geography of letters known only to the people who worked there. You notice something else: the typeface itself. We often wonder why Gutenberg and his peers clung to the dense, spiky Gothic script known as blackletter, instead of adopting the rounder Roman style used by Renaissance scribes. The answer is likely practical blackletter allowed more text to fit on a page, saving expensive parchment. But there's a deeper, quieter reason too. Those bold vertical strokes and sharp serifs carried the memory of handwriting. When you squint at a Gutenberg Bible, you're not just seeing printed words. You're seeing the ghost of a quill, the trace of a scribe's hand now frozen in metal. Early readers didn't want the future. They wanted a more efficient past. Sometimes a workshop scrap pile tells the most interesting stories. In the 1980s, researchers in Germany uncovered curious pages from early presses test sheets where damaged or mismatched type had been used. These oddities, dubbed Frankenstein texts, combined philosophical treatises with snippets of lullabies or kitchen recipes. A page might begin with Aristotle and end with gingerbread. These weren't meant for publication. They were apprentices' practice sheets, the press equivalent of doodles. But over time, they became artifacts in their own right windows into the daily messiness of printing. In an age when every written error was public, these misprints showed that even revolutions had typos. You run your thumb across a kerned letter, an F, leaning slightly into the I beside it. In printing terms, kerning refers to the way some characters are trimmed or extended so they nestle more elegantly together. It's easy to take for granted now, but this small refinement marked a major shift. In handwriting, such spacing is instinctive. But on the press, it had to be engineered, each tiny overlap carved into the mold. Suddenly, language wasn't just about sound or meaning. It was about balance, geometry, negative space. The press didn't just replicate text. It redesigned how text existed. As you return the E to its compartment, you pause for a final reflection. The word font that we now associate with digital typefaces didn't begin with pixels or screens. It came from the Latin funder, to pour. A font was once the vessel into which molten metal was poured, the literal crucible of language. From heat and gravity and pressure, letters were born. And from those letters, thought was preserved. That's the magic, isn't it? These tiny, heavy blocks once used by nameless apprentices under candlelight still carry the shape of ideas. They were built to be touched, inked, pressed into permanence. And though the metal has long cooled, the impressions remain. When we read today, we are tracing those same grooves, those same margins, those same whispers in lead. And somewhere, perhaps tucked in the back of a dusty drawer, and old E still waits, quiet, heavy, ready. You stand beneath the wooden rafters of a 15th century paper mill, where everything smells faintly of water, rotting cloth, and distant fires. The air is thick and damp, heavy with the scent of fermenting linen, old garments and sails, long forgotten and quietly decaying into usefulness once again. Under your feet, the floorboards tremble ever so slightly, as if the building itself breathes. Massive wooden hammers, driven by a creaking water wheel outside, rise and fall with deliberate force, pounding torn rags into pulp. Each thud lands with the slow rhythm of a heartbeat. This isn't just noise, it's transformation in progress. This is where paper was born, not from trees, but from lives already lived. And though the printing press would be the star of the story, paper was its silent partner. Without it, Gutenberg's invention would have remained a clever curiosity. The press gave words wings, yes, but the paper gave them something to cling to. In these mills, the unlikely raw material was waste. The rag trade, the hidden engine behind the print revolution, was fueled by the most ordinary scraps. Housewives saved their threadbare chemises, monks donated torn robes, and even the fabric from burial shrouds found its way here. Sailors traded in tattered sails. Servants offered stained aprons. Once, these textiles adorned living bodies. Now, they were on their way to becoming pages. Historians estimate that it took around 170 rags to produce enough paper for a single Bible. Imagine that, a bishop's collar alongside a fishmonger's apron, their stories disassembled, boiled, beaten, and reformed into a single narrative vessel. The fiber didn't forget, it simply changed its voice. You kneel beside a wide wooden vat and dip your fingers into the slurry. It's cool and fibrous, textured like uncooked porridge, with a faint sourness from fermentation. Your hand moves slowly through the liquid, and you catch on something solid, a button, perhaps, or the curved edge of a lost buckle. Sometimes rings turned up in the pulp, or coins, or little bits of thread too stubborn to surrender. Children, often referred to as rag pickers, were employed for these smaller tasks. Their nimble fingers could pull apart seams, pick lint from hemmed edges, and extract hidden debris. The paper they helped create still remembers them. Under ultraviolet light, historians can detect the faint glow of leftover indigo from blue tunics or the red hues of madder dye ghosts of medieval garments flickering just beneath the surface. A worker lifts a newly formed sheet from the mold, holding it up to the sunlight that filters through high, dust-speckled windows. You notice the watermark, a translucent emblem faintly pressed into the fibers. This one shows a bull's head, but others might feature anchors, crowns, or even fantastical creatures. These weren't decorative flourishes. They were identifiers, like signatures woven directly into the material. Each mill had its own design, a form of early copyright protection and brand assurance. One mill famously used a mermaid in response to a rival's fish-shaped mark proof that even in the 15th century, branding could be cheeky. Before this paper would meet ink and type, it had to be seasoned. The term sounds gentle, almost culinary, but it referred to a crucial stage, stacks of paper left to rest for weeks or even months in damp stone cellars. This process allowed the sheets to reach just the right level of humidity. Too dry, and they'd greedily drink up ink, leaving blurred impressions. Too moist, and the paper would buckle under the pressure of the press. Some print shops added peculiar twists to their technique. One Venetian printer included wine in the soaking water, claiming it made the paper more cheerful. Modern chemistry suggests that alcohol does affect cellulose structure, but whether it improved print quality or simply lightened the mood remains a question left unanswered. Back in the drying room, you run your hand along a fully dried sheet, feeling the delicate texture of laid lines, those faint ridges created by the wire mesh in the mold. Invisible at first glance, they emerge in the light like veins beneath skin. These patterns told printers everything they needed to know. They could indicate thickness, grain direction, even the hand that formed the sheet. Early readers weren't passive observers of paper. They touched it, sniffed it, sometimes even tasted it. Some inks were made with salts or iron gall, and their bitterness lingered. Paper was never neutral. Its texture carried meaning, mood, and message long before the words were applied. You glance at a torn edge on one of the rejected sheets and marvel at the durability of the fibers. Unlike the paper of today, which crumbles after a few decades, this material was built to last. Made from flax, hemp, or cotton, medieval paper fibers interlocked like a living weave. Modern scientists have studied these pages and found that they outlast wood pulp alternatives by centuries. It's one of the quiet ironies of history. In an age without electricity or microchips, people wrote on a medium designed for permanence. While our digital archives rest on machines that may go silent within decades, cost was another surprise. Paper, not ink or type, often proved the most expensive part of printing. Wars, plagues, and even fashion trends could swing prices wildly. When short doublets became fashionable, fewer long garments were discarded, leading to a linen shortage and paper became harder to make. This gave rise to a shadow market for seconds, lower quality sheets sold quietly and used when supplies ran thin. Some books from the period bear the evidence pages with embedded feathers, faint stains, or off-center chain lines. These imperfections speak to an economy always balancing precision with necessity. The floor vibrates beneath your feet once more as the hammers resume their slow, unrelenting rhythm. Each strike echoes through the beams, through your shoes, through your chest. The rhythm is not rushed. It is ancient, purposeful. It marks time not in minutes, but in transformations cloth to pulp, pulp to page, page to memory. You wipe your hands on your apron, but the scent of the slurry clings. Earthy, soft, a little sour like the breath of old stories, waiting to be retold. You're reminded that paper was never just a surface for writing. It was a stage for ideas, a platform for truth and error alike. A vessel strong enough to carry ink across centuries, yet humble enough to begin as rags. And so, when the first printed page finally emerged from Gutenberg, pressed dark ink pressed cleanly into pale fiber, it rested not just on metal type or revolutionary ideas, but on the silent invisible labor of papermakers and pickers, sorters, and stampers, the forgotten hands behind the curtain. They turned yesterday's garments into tomorrow's memory. The press gave language motion, but paper gave it something far more precious, a place to stay. The candle flickers low beside you, casting soft, restless shadows along the rough stone walls of the scriptorium. Its light dances across shelves, lined with old ink pots and curled scraps of vellum, illuminating the page before you again for the third time. You squint, blinking sleep from your eyes, trying once more to trace the line without error. Somewhere in the monastery, a bell tolls the hour of matins. It is the second hour of morning by modern clocks, but in this timeless place, only the steady rhythm of work matters. Your quill hovers in the dim light, its feathered plume bent with age. You dip it into the inkwell once more, careful not to submerge too deeply. The ink clings to the nib like syrup iron gall, thick and dark, with a smell like rust and smoke. It bites the vellum sharply, carving each letter into permanence. Too heavy a hand, and it will bleed. Too light, and the words disappear. Made from oak galls, iron sulfate, and gum arabic, this ink doesn't sit on the surface. It bonds with it, chemically marrying the words to the skin. Modern conservators struggle with its acidity, but they can't deny its durability. 1,000 years from now, this line may still be legible, outliving kingdoms and the languages in which it was written. You pause. A sneeze bubbles behind your nose, a dangerous twitch when working with a page that has taken months to complete. You hold it back and glance toward the pigments on your bench-dry powders and walnut shells and tiny clay dishes. There is lapis lazuli from Afghanistan, crushed into a vivid ultramarine that cost more than its weight in silver. Vermilion red, distilled from mercury in the Spanish mountains. Gold leaf so delicate, quivers with the slightest breath. The materials alone could bankrupt a small village. This book of ours is being prepared for a duke's private chapel, his devotion measured in ounces of gold and the labor of your weary hands. You stretch your back, and your vertebrae pop in a slow cascade like a string of prayer beads. Your shoulders ache, hunched as they've been for hours. No cushion, no rest, only focus. Artists and scribes were often depicted in manuscripts with slouched postures and crooked fingers, not out of caricature, but truth. This pose became the icon of the scholarly class. In time, it even earned a name, scripter's palsy, the tremor of a lifetime spent tracing letters. Modern physicians would grimace at the posture and light levels of a medieval scriptorium, but comfort was never the point devotion was. You glance across the room where a few other scribes are also still working. One mutters to himself as he rubs pigment into egg yolk. Another breathes heavily, head resting on folded arms. The silence is broken only by the scrape of quills, the occasional cough, and the low hiss of wind outside the thick glass windows. Your eye catches a small stitched tag peeking out from the edge of a manuscript. It's part of the Pecha system, an ingenious academic method born in medieval university towns. Instead of loaning out entire books, masters divided texts into sections and distributed them to various students or scribes simultaneously for copying. These cloth tags helped keep order when the sections were reassembled. Some marginal notes from the time complain about bad handwriting or missing folios. Even in the 13th century, collaborative editing had its problems. As the candle's flame gutters, you remember to flip the hourglass. Time here moves with the sun and shadows. Morning light is best for detail work. Late afternoons are for rubrication, those decorative red headings that divide sections. Evenings are reserved for careful proofreading. But no hour is sacred when a commission is due. Some orders come with strange clauses. One royal contract demanded a complete Bible be finished before the feast of St. Michael, or the scriptorium would owe 20 pounds of pepper. A medieval version of a missed deadline email written in spice. You blow gently on the ink to help it dry, careful not to smudge your careful strokes. The page stirs beneath your breath, catching the warm air. This sheet of vellum, smooth and creamy once, belonged to a calf that never saw full season. Its hide was soaked in lime, stretched tight on a frame, scraped again and again until it became this unlikely vessel for thought. There's something solemn in that quiet exchange of life for legacy. A single Bible required roughly 170 calfskins. A whole herd transformed into scripture. You reach for your final touch, a colophon. Not exactly a signature, but a quiet wink to posterity. In the lower margin, between the lines of Latin and the painted border, you add a miniature figure, a monk in a brown robe with your distinctive nose waving. A self-portrait the size of a thumbprint. Centuries from now, a curious scholar might spot it and wonder who you were, the anonymous craftsman in a dying tradition. You do not know yet, but your vocation is fading. The press is coming, and yet, what a final chapter it has been. In these last years of hand-copied manuscripts, the art has reached its peak. Faced with the machine's rise, the scriptoria responded not by retreating, but by leaning into beauty. The final wave of illuminated manuscripts created in the very decades that Gutenberg's press with thunder to life were some of the most breathtaking ever made. Gold was laid more delicately, margins filled with angels and vines, pigments ground to dust for pages that shone like stained glass. The press could print, but it could not illuminate. It could duplicate, but not embellish. The scribes knew their time was passing, but they chose to meet the future in defiance, with beauty, with detail, with work slow enough to rival time itself. The first light of dawn glows pale across the cold stone windowsill. Birds stir in the nearby trees. You lay your quill aside and close the cover on your work. The candle has burned nearly to the base, a small puddle of wax collecting on the desk beside you. You stretch again, your spine crackling like parchment. The printing press is coming, yes. But for this moment, here, now, you've given language your hands, your eyes, your breath. You've turned ink and skin and pigment into something that may still whisper long after the presses fall silent. And somewhere, a tiny rabbit with a lopsided ear smiles quietly in the third psalm's border, unnoticed by all but you. You wake to the scent of linseed oil and scorched walnut shells, a pungent perfume familiar to every printer. It clings to your clothes, your skin, your very breath. Your fingers, stiff from yesterday's toil, bear permanent souvenirs, deep indigo crescents beneath, the nails and dark smudges along the knuckles that defy soap and scrubbing. These stains are your badge of initiation, the ink-black tattoos of someone reluctantly adopted into the pressman's trade. The floor beneath your boots is a canvas of unintended masterpieces. A palm-shaped blot near the press shows where someone stumbled and caught themselves, while a streak down the length of the room marks a tray of loose type launched during a moment of clumsy panic. Centuries from now, historians will examine floorboards in old print shops and find similar marks, the enduring art of accidental labor. You've heard of printers whose very skin darkened permanently over the years, so deeply infused with ink that they became walking testaments to their work. You glance up at a splash on the ceiling, a relic from last week's disastrous experiment with iron gall ink. That volatile mix of tannin-rich galls and iron sulfate behaves like a living creature, sometimes flowing smooth and dark, other times clumping into a noxious sludge that spits like a cat. Old recipes warn ominously. Do not brew on feast days and beware the ink that bites the page too deep. Modern chemists now know that early ink makers added all manner of strange ingredients, from wine to honey, even urine guarding their formulas like alchemists hoarding the elixir of immortality. You pick up the ink ball's leather-covered pads used to apply ink to type and begin working them to softness. The best ones are dogskin, supposedly from animals that died peacefully. You try not to dwell on that, as you need the stiff leather, coaxing flexibility back into its surface. The motion is oddly meditative, like kneading bread dough, though this dough leaves behind a permanent trail of black wherever it touches. In the archives, scholars recently discovered something remarkable. Early printed books often carry unintentional autographs. Under special lighting, smudged fingerprints emerge on title pages, noseprints appear on colophons, and full handprints can sometimes be found where frustrated printers slammed a sheet into place. These accidental marks, made in moments of fatigue or distraction, are now the ghostly signatures of anonymous workers, shadow printers, whose hands left more enduring traces than their names ever did. Your inkstone still holds yesterday's remnants, a congealed puddle now covered with a leathery skin. You poke at it, watching the surface crack and curl. A splash of vinegar and some determined stirring will revive it. Good enough for today's work. Early printers learned to stretch their supplies, which explains why some books subtly shift in color from one section to the next deep black, giving way to pale sepia as ink supplies dwindled. These variations are prized today by collectors who call such copies rainbow editions. Your apron is more map than garment now. Once plain linen, it has become a tapestry of stains, a blot here from a misfired broadsheet, a reddish smear from experimenting with vermilion pigment. In places, the fabric stands stiff with dried ink. You've considered washing it, but superstition holds you back. Every seasoned printer knows that a freshly laundered apron invites disaster, just as whistling in the shop guarantees a day of misaligned type. Last week, you received a shipment of crushed mother-of-pearl from a nearby jeweler's waste. A pinch accidentally slipped into the ink mix. Today, as you review the results, you notice a shimmering quality in the margins of the text. Depending on the light, the words gleam faintly accidental alchemy that lends certain passages an almost sacred glow. You pretend it's unintentional, but you've already planned to repeat the trick for the next sermon booklet. Some ideas deserve to shine. The workshop cat a required member of any self-respecting print shop weaves between your legs, her paws tracking ink across the floor. Last month, she stepped across a fresh broadsheet. The resulting paw prints turned the page into a bestseller, purchased by readers intrigued by the mysterious beast marks. She's become part mascot, part saboteur, and entirely indispensable. Your hands, by day's end, look like maps of forgotten lands. The creases of your palms have filled with ink, forming deltas and tributaries along the lifelines. The back of your wrists bear smudges from pushing paper against the tympan. These marks will fade in time, only to be replaced by tomorrow's new landscape. You've come to see them not as stains, but as the topography of your craft. The candle at your side burns low, its wax dripping slowly onto the ink-splattered tabletop. The pooling wax mixes with stray ink droplets, forming tiny galaxies of swirling gray and gold. You pause, just for a moment, to admire the accidental beauty that emerges when light meets language. In the morning, you'll scrape the mess away and start anew. But for now, this ephemeral universe belongs to you alone. The press sleeps in the corner, its metal arms resting, its gears quiet. But even in silence, it radiates potential. Tomorrow, it will roar again, demanding your muscle and patience. You will ink the form, press the paper, inspect each page. And you will leave your fingerprints, literal and otherwise, upon the world once more. The scent of fresh ink still lingers in the air as your fingertips trace the spine of what appears to be an ordinary prayer book. Bound in unassuming leather, its surface creased by time and touch, the book could easily pass unnoticed on any monastic shelf. Yet hidden beneath that modest cover lies a secret. The pages you hold are no mere devotional script, but a forbidden translation of the Bible, disguised beneath layers of calculated craftsmanship and quiet rebellion. You feel the faint ridge where two texts meet, the original Latin scraped nearly translucent to make room for words considered dangerous. This is the clandestine art of palimpsesting, where banned ideas survived by overriding what once was sacred. Rather than destroy old texts, printers and scribes repurposed them, concealing radical thought in the folds of the very pages meant to suppress it. The practice reflected a truth that those in power never fully understood, that ideas, once birthed, rarely obey boundaries. Early printers became masters of disguise. In regions where vernacular translations were outlawed, Bibles wore clever masks. Title pages proclaimed safe, pious content meditations, psalms, or herbal guides, while the interiors spoke in the mother tongue of ordinary people. For inquisitors and censors, these disguises worked. To the untrained eye, the books appeared as devotional aids or almanacs. Only those who knew what to look for a particular watermark, a symbol in the margin, or a whisper among trusted circles, could decode the truth. One such artifact lies open before you now. At first glance, it appears to be a herbal compendium, pages adorned with delicate botanical drawings and Latin labels. But when tilted under candlelight, ghostly Hebrew characters flicker beneath the stems and leaves, emerging like phantoms. The printer had layered plant pigments over an older script, trusting time to reveal the truth. The technique was brilliant. As the ink faded with age, the once hidden message slowly reappeared. A garden of forbidden words blooming centuries after the danger had passed. Printers also mastered more technical subversions. One method, known as dual-depth printing, relied on manipulating press pressure. Approved texts would be printed boldly, their impressions deep and clear. But dangerous passages, printed at reduced pressure, left only faint indentations invisible unless the page was angled just so. Readers in the know would tilt the pages beneath a lamp or the sun, revealing hidden commentary without a trace during casual inspection. Still more ingenious were the so-called key books, lank-looking volumes that appeared empty to the naked eye. But when exposed to a specific solution, their true contents emerged. Some used vinegar, others lemon juice. One infamous edition, now housed in the Vatican Library, required exposure to urine to reveal its Protestant commentary, a detail as strange as it is practical. Even paper became a vehicle for rebellion. Hidden in the fibers were watermarks, those faint designs pressed into paper during production used not merely as trademarks, but as codes. A dove might signal a Protestant sympathizer. A broken chain, a call to reform. Some Dutch mills developed entire systems of watermark messaging, coordinating underground routes for the smuggling of illegal texts. A tower missing its top floor might mark a city where secret presses operated. Books, too, bore visual codes. Marginalia, once the domain of doodling monks and contemplative scholars, became a covert language. In the margins of psalters and missals, innocent-looking flowers or birds sometimes conveyed much more. A sequence of blooms might direct the reader to a heretical passage elsewhere. A carefully drawn knot might represent a specific theological concept. This illuminated cryptography enabled dissent to live within the very books the Church distributed. Color, often dismissed as mere ornament, also became a shield. Red ink, typically used for headings or sacred names, was co-opted by radicals. Knowing that most censors ignored colored text, some printers set entire treatises in crimson. One Geneva workshop famously printed Calvinist commentary using ink made from crushed cochineal insects, a deep ruby hue that mimicked the robes of cardinals, hiding defiance behind the Church's own palette. And then there were the books within books. As you leaf through a weathered volume, your thumb catches on a nearly imperceptible seam in the back cover. Pressing gently, a hidden compartment clicks open, revealing a miniature Gospel of Mark, barely the size of your palm. These thumb Bibles became the final line of resistance text small enough to carry unnoticed, or even swallow if danger arose. Some were printed on silk to eliminate the telltale rustle of paper. Others used onion skin parchment, so thin it bordered on invisible. Your gaze returns to the desk, where a sleeping cat stretches across scattered tools. Its tail knocks over an ink pot, sending a black pool spreading across the wood. You watch as it blossoms like a Rorschach blot, the kind that censors must have imagined lurking in every letter danger, hiding in the curl of a G, the tilt of a crossbar. For every pamphlet they burned, 2 more seemed to appear. Suppression only strengthened the spread. In the end, the printing press didn't merely replicate texts, it replicated resistance. The ingenuity of its early users turned censorship into a challenge, not a deterrent. Language, given form in paper and ink, developed a survival instinct. And now, centuries later, that instinct still lingers, in the faint lines beneath a page, in the way light catches old fibers, in the silence between printed words. The book before you closes with a whisper, not a thud. Not because its message is finished, but because its message waits for eyes that know how to read in the dark. Your fingers trace the sharp serifs of a freshly cast type, feeling the microscopic ridges where molten metal met the matrix. This isn't just a letter, it's a philosophical statement frozen in lead. The curve of this J, the stance of this T, the jaunty angle of this ampersand, each bears the invisible weight of centuries. What Gutenberg began as a practical necessity has since become a complex battleground, where every letterform is loaded with history, power, and ideology. Early printers quickly realized that typefaces weren't neutral carriers of information. The dense Gothic blackletter favored in German presses wasn't merely decorative, it invoked imperial authority, its angular shapes echoing the pointed arches of cathedral windows and the gleam of ceremonial swords. Meanwhile, in Renaissance Italy, printers championed the softer, more rounded Roman type, or littera antiqua, arguing that the clarity and symmetry of classical forms were better suited for a revived humanism. A 1465 specimen you examine seems conflicted, both typefaces sharing a page. Like rivals forced to collaborate, the tension between tradition and reform visible in every line. The subtler revolution, however, came with punctuation. Medieval manuscripts relied on simple slashes and dots, leaving interpretation to the reader's rhythm. But printing demanded precision. The emergence of the comma, derived from the Greek comma, or a piece cut off, sparked fierce debate. Conservative clerics denounced it as a foreign innovation, a break in sacred continuity. The semicolon provoked even greater fury. One bishop famously called it the serpent in Eden, tempting readers to dissect sentences that should remain whole. Yet printers pressed on, understanding these marks weren't mere tools, they were cognitive scaffolding, reshaping how people thought. You hold a fragile page from the infamous Catholicon grammar, one of the earliest attempts to standardize printed Latin. In the margins, early experiments with parentheses shimmer faintly. These lunulae, or little moons, as they were first called, made room for nuance. Their curved arms cradled digressions, caveats, and confessions, creating space within space. Theologians panicked. If every printed aside might be mistaken for Holy Writ, where would heresy end? The Church banned parentheses from Scripture. Ironically, modern scholars now use them to track which passages printers themselves viewed as suspect. A breakthrough in a Swiss monastery revealed a secret war of subtle sabotage. When faced with orders to eliminate controversial punctuation, some printers instead manipulated spacing. They inserted near-invisible gap-style metal spacers that created natural pauses, mimicking commas. Others went further, inking certain punctuation so faintly it faded after a few readings. The most inventive used tactile cues, tiny nicks filed into the sides of letters that, when touched, guided a reader's fingers through the rhythm of the sentence. These physical interventions bypass the eye entirely, delivering prosody through the fingertips. You pause over a lowercase, I the smallest of letters, yet the bearer of tremendous ideological weight. In early blackletter, the dot or tittle was bold and prominent, distinguishing it from a sea of minims that looked nearly identical. During the Protestant Reformation, printers aligned with reformers began reducing the tittle's size, producing texts that appeared cleaner, less cluttered, subtly rejecting what they saw as Catholic excess. By the time of the Geneva Bible, the dot had almost vanished. Catholic presses responded in kind, enlarging their is to a near boastful degree. These silent typographic battles played out in sermons and psalms, the politics of faith waged in millimeters. You lean closer to inspect a rare cue. This single character, filed down along its tail, once sparked ecclesiastical outrage. In 1527, French theologians denounced a particular italic cue as heretical its flourish, supposedly resembling the signature of Martin Luther. In response, printers crafted chameleon cues with interchangeable tails. One version appeared in official inspections, another in the actual print run. Wear patterns on surviving types suggest these tails were swapped hundreds of times, each change a silent act of resistance. In the typecases around you, past the rows of vowels and consonants, rest the troublemaker sorts. These were not ordinary letters. One T might feature an elongated crossbar, later joined by a U to spell TRV, a Protestant rallying cry. Another A might have a removable crossbar, allowing it to pass for the Greek lambda perfect for smuggling forbidden philosophy into theological texts. Printers also crafted ligature pairs, like CH or TH, fused in such a way that, when viewed obliquely, they resembled esoteric symbols. These glyphs existed in plain sight, harmless alone but explosive in combination. Light slants through the window, casting the typecase in long, jagged shadows. Suddenly, what seemed like random assortments of metal now resemble cryptograms. As spaces between letters form strange patterns, negative images that suggest hidden meanings. This illusion captures the spirit of the age. For early printers, typography wasn't just about legibility. It was about subtext, subversion, and subterfuge. Every printed page became a palimpsest of ideology, some of it spoken, much of it whispered. Modern readers rarely consider the politics embedded in a font. But in the 15th and 16th centuries, every curve and serif was contested territory. A Gothic B was not just a letter, it was an allegiance. A Roman G suggested a Greco-Roman revival, and a nod to secular rationality. Even the humble colon became a point of contention, its twin dots seen as unnecessary flourishes by purists. While reformers praised it for clarifying scripture, the shape of thought was literally shaped by type. As dusk deepens, you pick up a specimen sheet and tilt it in the fading light. The embossed letters catch the glow like tiny sculptures. You run a finger over the indentations, the shallow bowls of E's, the proud stem of a D, the anchor-like hook of the F. These aren't just signs, they're tools of persuasion. Typography taught people not only how to read, but how to believe. The press didn't just spread doctrine, it created the visual grammar by which belief was formed. This was the silent revolution Gutenberg never fully foresaw, not just the mass duplication of texts, but the standardization of how texts looked, felt, and sounded. Typography was the interface between the idea and the eye. And in that liminal space, wars were fought not with swords, but with serifs. Not in cathedrals, but in commas. You place the page back in its drawer and close the typecase. The letters rest again, waiting. Tomorrow, they may print poetry, propaganda, or prayer. But tonight, they sleep as they have for centuries, tight-packed, orderly, and humming with unspent meaning. The morning light slants through the papermaker's studio, illuminating floating motes of linen fiber that drift like slow-motion snowflakes. Your fingers sink into a vat of pulp, the cool slurry swirling around your wrists as you lift the mold. A wooden frame laced with fine wire like the web of a careful spider. Here, where botany meets bibliography, the physical world yields itself to the architecture of thought. Today's watermark isn't a bull's head or a merchant's anchor, but a pansy, its 5 delicate petals etched in looping wire, a quiet rebellion against the tyranny of utility. Early papermakers shared an intimacy with plants that modern readers seldom fathom. Blue dye for tinted paper came from fermented woad leaves, soaked in stale urine to produce its striking hue, a pungent alchemy that turned weeds into pigment. Reds bled from madder roots steeped precisely 6 weeks in lime water. Yet the most essential botanical contribution was sizing, that invisible coating which kept ink from bleeding. Printers swore by gelatin, rendered from deer hooves, while scribes favored Irish moss. Each workshop had its signature bouquet earthy, sour, sometimes meaty, a fragrant fingerprint of creation. Between newly pressed sheets, you slip a sprig of lavender, not just for its scent, but to deter moths. This centuries-old habit spawned a hidden treasure in the history of books, botanical time capsules. A 1487 herbal in Bologna still exudes a ghostly hint of rosemary when opened. A Parisian Psalter releases dried rose petals, now crumbling like ancient confetti. Some modern conservators consider removing these so-called contaminants, unaware they are handling the medieval version of a sensory bookmark. These fragrant remains are more than accidental inclusions. They are archival ghosts, calling forward forgotten gardens. The connection between flora and folios deepens further. Paper mills procured rags from hospitals, discarded linen bandages boiled down and reborn as pages. Apothecaries noticed that pressed herbs sometimes left their shape within the paper mold. Thus arose Hortus Siccus in Pagina, the dry garden on the page. Some monastic gardens grew flowers for this purpose. One 15th century missal in the Vatican Library features different medicinal plants pressed into the margins of each section. transforming scripture into a book of physical and spiritual healing. Each bloom, fixed in place by water and pressure, became part of the text's theology. Your thumb glides along the edge of a drying sheet, tracing its decal, the soft, feathery fringe that modern luxury printers now replicate artificially. Originally, it was merely excess pulp creeping toward the mold's edge. But it became a status symbol when wealthy clients demanded untrimmed pages, proof that their volumes came from whole sheets. Ironically, workers had to preserve what they once discarded. Some decals even bear pinpricks from rose thorns used to lift delicate sheets, an imprint of nature pressed into the margins of literature. A gentle accident made permanent, each thorn a nod to the hand behind the page. A remote Spanish monastery revealed how plants played a role in bookbinding. Hollyhock roots gave flexibility to spine glue, enabling books to withstand humid climates. Walnut oil, mixed with egg whites, served as a slow-drying adhesive ideal for gold tooling, allowing artisans to apply elaborate designs with care. These botanical adhesives have helped 15th century books remain supple today, while their 19th century descendants, made with synthetic glues, crack and crumble. The durability of the handmade echoed the patience of its making, slow, deliberate, fragrant. The studio's cat bats at a rope of hemp fiber, unaware of its significance. Hemp, along with flax, formed the raw material for early paper. Their long fibers yielded astonishing durability. Scientific tests show that Gutenberg-era paper often outperforms modern equivalents. Why? Because it was made from slow-decaying plant cloth, not acidic wood pulp. Each sheet preserves the memory of medieval Europe's flora, the very same plants that clothed, healed, and shaded the people now captured their thoughts in pressed form. A page, then, was more than parchment. It was the garden reassembled. You lift a finished sheet toward the light. The watermark pansy appears to float within the paper, suspended between laid lines like a botanical ghost. Sometimes actual flowers found their way into the process. One breviary in the Bodleian Library contains the recurring silhouette of a forget-me-not perhaps. It drifted into the vat during a spring bloom. Though the flower has long since dissolved, its shape remains, an echo of something that once bloomed and then was caught in the act of becoming language. These ghostly impressions offer an accidental poetry, each one unintentional yet utterly necessary. As the day closes, your hands bear the subtle marks of labor. There's a faint chlorophyll green on your fingertips, a tannic stain from oak galls, a waxy sheen from beeswax used in sealing. These traces will fade overnight, but the impressions you've embedded in each sheet will not. Each page contains an ecosystem: flax spun into linen, gall for ink, starch for sizing, pollen for memory. When the ink fades and the petals crumble, the idea still endures proof that nature and knowledge are inseparably pressed together. These are not just documents. They are slow fossils of thought, cleaning the vat and rinsing the molds. You glance up at the drying lines, each sheet waving softly in the evening breeze like a row of quiet banners. They resemble prayer flags, suspended with intention above the contemplative stillness of the workshop. This was never just a craft. It was an offering. Each page is the sum of hundreds of anonymous lives: farmers who raised the flax, washerwomen who scrubbed the cloth, binders who stitched the spines, scribes who would soon fill the spaces. Paper is not merely medium. It is communal memory flattened, dried, and bound. Outside, the last streaks of daylight skim the window panes. The watermark catches a final glint just for an instant before melting back into the page. Tomorrow will bring new fibers, new petals, new stories to imprint. But for tonight, the paper rests whole and silent, a perfect stillness born of life, waiting to speak. The scent of smoke still clings to your sleeves as you unpack the disguised crate, its false bottom concealing the real cargo beneath sacks of wool. These books bear no colophons, no printer's marks, nothing to connect them to your workshop. Each one is a silent rebel, its plain binding belying the dangerous ideas nestled between the pages. You run a finger along the edge of the top volume, feeling the slight ridge where two title pages were glued together. Peel back the outer layer, proclaiming lives of saints, and the real text reveals itself. On the freedom of a Christian, by a certain troublesome German monk. Censorship in the age of print was rarely blunt. Church and state employed armies of professional readers, expurgators, tasked with combing through texts line by line, blacking out heresy with calculated strokes of ink. Their efforts created strange textual mosaics, where Aristotle might pause mid-sentence, his thought amputated by an inky void. Particularly offensive passages were sometimes cut out entirely with knives, leaving books with the strange feel of missing teeth. Others were stitched shut or replaced with blank parchment, creating strange pockets of silence in one's flowing arguments. You study the latest confiscation decree nailed to your workshop door, the ink already smudged by rain and the corners curling from heat. The censors grow smarter. They now examine watermarks, compare font shapes to catalogs of banned presses, and even sniff the paper for the sharp tang of Geneva-made ink. But your countermeasures evolve faster. The latest trick lies not in ink, but in thread. Your binders use coded stitching. Red thread at 3 centimeter intervals means safe content. Blue thread at 2 means subversion, buried beneath a pious front. No one checks bindings, not yet. More surprising allies emerged in the kitchen. Authorities ignored cookbooks, assuming them innocent, and so printers began hiding dissidents within recipes. One recipe for soup d'orge includes this. Take 2 measures of justification by faith alone. Blend with good works as one does raisins in pudding for flavor, not substance. Culinary theology. These books passed freely between households. Read aloud during meals. Debated between bites. Scholars now call them soup tractates, and over 200 have been catalogued. One recipe for stewed trout still sparks debate. Food advice or code for spiritual rebellion? The most unexpected code emerged in song. Music notation, with its fluid curves and ambiguous symbols, offered perfect cover for invisible messages. In your book of chants, the neumes contain more than melody. A rising squiggle here, a crooked flag there, each shape maps to a letter in cipher. The Agnus Dei becomes a whisper of safe houses and secret presses. Rumors spread of choir masters teaching their congregations to sing certain stanzas just slightly off-key, a sonic wink to the initiated. These heresies cannot be read aloud without revealing their truth. They must be sung wrongly, deliberately, and together. Recent raids taught you to value the decoy. Some volumes leave the shop with deliberate flaws, a backwards letter, an odd break in the text making them obvious to inspectors. These trapped copies get confiscated, examined, held up as trophies. Meanwhile, perfect copies, printed later in the same run, continue their quiet journey through hidden channels. The technique works so well that some censors have begun to doubt themselves, fearing they seize only the bait. The shop cat weaves between your legs, its tail brushing a stack of ballast books. These are deliberately boring texts, printed solely to conceal others. Entire crates have on the proper length of Mennes beards or seasonal weather. Patterns in the Diocese of Meaux travel safely because no one reads beyond the title. Beneath these somnolent pages lie contraband Bibles printed in tiny vernacular script, wrapped in onion skin and sealed with beeswax to keep their scent from betraying them to dogs. One colleague in Amsterdam soaks his paper in tobacco juice, deterring handling through sheer pungency. Your assistant appears beside you now, cradling a bundle wrapped in waxed cloth. Within are the day's new woodblock's innocent-looking illustrations for an anatomy manual. But the organs are labeled not with Latin, but ciphered names of banned authors and booksellers. One lung becomes Wycliffe, a liver Tyndall. A cursory glance would see only diagram and bone. To the informed reader, It is a map of intellectual resistance hiding in plain sight. The carving is delicate, careful work, its danger offset by its beauty. Even ink can deceive. You prepare tomorrow's batch using a recipe labeled black, but which contains enough vermilion to shift its hue under candlelight. It appears brown to a casual glance, the official inspection color. The text printed today will fade into legitimacy by the time anyone inspects it. Yesterday's printings, in darker ink, already travel by safer hands. Each new ordinance against unapproved content inspires a dozen innovations. The effort is exhausting. But there's something beautiful in the chase. Every restriction breeds resistance. Every silence calls forth new language. You've recently begun experimenting with scent-based decoys. Lavender rubbed into bindings mimics the smell of ecclesiastical prayer books. A touch of vinegar on the spine disguises the ink's acidity. Some pages are perfumed with clove and rosemary aromatics that confuse the noses of inquisitorial dogs. A shipment bound for the coast carries codexes wrapped in fishnets and oiled parchment. Their smell almost unbearable to human handlers, but near invisible to inspection. What the authorities fail to grasp is this: printing presses don't merely multiply words, they multiply pathways. With each crackdown, the press teaches language how to hide, how to duck under thresholds, slip between borders, nestle inside harmless shapes. Books now wear masks. Pages speak in ciphers. In the margins of cookbooks, in the pauses of hymns, in the stains of bindings, the dangerous words still speak. As dusk closes in, you sit at your press, fingers stained from ink, candlelight flickering across the metal letters laid in their forms. You do not sign your name. There is no colophon to claim credit. But you know someone, somewhere, will read these pages and recognize the silent defiance in every unmarked line. Not because it announces itself, but because it survived. And in the age of fire and fear, survival itself is a kind of revolution. The road dust coats your boots as you adjust the straps, holding your precious cargo, a wooden case filled with lead type, each letter carefully nestled in its compartment like seeds awaiting planting. You've walked this route before, from Mainz to Frankfurt, though never with such a heavy load. The printing press may have been too large to carry, but the knowledge of how to build one fits neatly between your ears. And the type itself, the living, reusable essence of the craft, travels with you, clinking softly with each step, like a wandering scribe's ink pots. Printing was never meant to stay in one place. Like the troubadours and tinkers who moved between towns, printers became nomadic by necessity. Persecution, economics, and the simple hunger for new markets sent them crisscrossing Europe with their cases of type and their heads full of technical secrets. Some traveled openly, setting up temporary shops in market squares. Others moved like shadows, their presence known only by the sudden appearance of banned texts in a region where none had been seen before. The roads between cities became veins carrying the lifeblood of the printed word. And you, like so many others, are now part of that circulation. Your pack holds more than type. Wrapped in oilcloth are precious sheets of paper, their watermarks carefully chosen to avoid suspicion. A small ink ball, its leather surface already hardening from disuse, waits to be revived with a few drops of linseed oil. Most valuable of all is the tiny well-worn notebook containing your master's recipes, inked formulations adjusted for local water quality. Paper sizing that won't crack in humid climates, even the trick for making cheap type metal look like the expensive alloy favored by prestigious shops. These are trade secrets worth more than gold, passed down in whispers and practiced in solitude. The challenges of mobile printing required ingenious solutions. Without the luxury of a permanent press, itinerant printers developed the frisket slap technique, inking type arranged on a flat board, then pressing paper onto it with a weighted blanket, or even the back of a spoon. The results weren't as precise as a screw press, but they served well enough for pamphlets and broadsheets meant to be read quickly and passed along. Some travelers specialized in instant books, carrying pre-printed sheets that could be customized with local titles or dedications before binding. A single medical manual might thus bear 3 different colophons in 3 different towns, each one tailored to the market. You pause at an inn and find the table etched with knife marks from previous visitor signs left by your peers. 3 parallel lines mean a town has a good market for books. A cross warns of active censors. A circle signals a sympathetic monastery that might offer protection or employment. You add your own mark, a tiny square with a dot in the center letting the next traveler know there is good rag paper for sale nearby. This quiet graffiti forms an invisible network of communication, a decentralized guidebook for the wandering tradesperson. Your journey winds past rivers where paper mills cluster like herons at a stream. Here, mobility becomes advantage. Stationary printers must accept what their region offers. You, on the other hand, know which mills press flax into sheets that hold ink without warping, which rag dealers bleach their fibers evenly. You've learned to test paper by sound alone the high, clear ping of well-sized stock, the damp thud of pulp poorly pressed. Every stop adds to your expertise, and every mistake, like the time you used acidic ink in a damp town, adds a cautionary footnote to your mental manual. The itinerant life is not without beauty. Some of the most admired incunabula, those cradle books, from the infancy of print, were born not in grand cities, but in roadside workshops tucked behind stables or cellars, borrowed from sympathetic hosts. These books carry no prestigious imprint, but their pages bear quiet excellence. Careful type, balanced margins, thoughtful illustrations often done by hand after printing. Scholars now pore over them like archaeologists, reconstructing the roots and methods of those who made literature mobile. Night finds you at a borrowed bench, candle guttering, composing stick in hand. You arrange letters for a broadside ballad, leaving space for a town name and a local lord's title. This adaptability is your bread and butter. While permanent shops might scorn minor commissions, you welcome them. Prayers for pilgrims, labels for apothecaries, birth announcements, and indulgences for those who can't afford the real thing. Your work is ephemeral, but it fills a need, and in that it finds power. Your neighbors change with every town. One night, it's a tanner offering scraps of leather for covers. Another, a brewer trading ink ingredients for a printed hymn. You sleep in barns and beside hearths. Your only constants the rattling case of type and the ideas that ride with it. And always there are others like you. A German woman rumored to have fled Nuremberg with her master's type, now headed to Venice. A Frenchman known to sleep beside his press, moving from fair to fair. A Dutch couple printing tracts from a canal boat moored just outside city walls. You think of the cat back in the workshop you left behind. She would sleep on the warm stone of the press bed, undisturbed by the clatter of movable type. You carry her memory like you carry the scent of linseed oil and metal, a quiet reminder of stillness within movement. One day, perhaps, you'll set down roots again, build another press. Hang new pages to dry in a place that feels like home, but not yet. Not while the road still leads forward. At the next dawn, you shoulder your pack again, the familiar weight of the type case against your spine. In every town, a new reader awaits. In every village, a soul who has never before held the printed word in hand. The press was born stationary, but its children like you are wanderers. And through your steps, your pages, your secret techniques and clever disguises, the world is being remade. Not in thunder or fire, but in type, ink, and paper. One portable revolution at a time. The acrid scent of roasted beans cuts through the familiar smells of ink and paper as you enter the dimly lit coffee house. In the corner, a printer gestures animatedly over a stained copy of yesterday's news sheet, his fingers leaving caffeinated fingerprints on the margins. This is where the Enlightenment quietly percolates amid the clatter of porcelain cups and the rustle of freshly printed pamphlets passed from hand to hand. The printing press gave Europe its voice, but coffee gave it a place to speak. Early coffee houses and printing shops developed a symbiotic relationship that reshaped civilization. Printers supplied the material for discussion news sheets, political treatises, scientific journals, while coffee houses created audiences eager for the next installment. The caffeine buzz that now fuels your late-night scrolling sessions first powered 18th century intellectuals debating Locke's theories or Newton's discoveries. Historians have traced how coffeehouse patrons would collectively fund print runs of particularly provocative manuscripts, creating a prototype of crowdsourced publishing. A ledger preserved in the British Museum from Fleet Street as Grecian coffeehouse records how regulars pooled shillings to print 500 copies of an anonymous tract on constitutional government, a viral post of its day. You run your finger along a coffee-stained page in an antique volume, the brown rings perfectly preserving the shape of some long-ago reader's cup. These accidental artifacts reveal reading habits more vividly than any diary. Some books show concentric ring patterns, suggesting repeated readings across multiple visits. Others bear the ghostly imprint of cups set down hastily when a particularly shocking passage demanded immediate debate. Conservationists have even identified national styles of Staines English drinkers, favored one grand splash from brimming mugs, while French readers left delicate, repeated crescents from Demitasse sips. The physical effects of caffeine on early modern readers can still be read in the margins. Annotations swell with energetic underlining and emphatic exclamation points, so different from the serene glosses of wine-sipping scholars in monastery cloisters. Some books contain what archivists call the jump, a sudden shift from tidy script to erratic scrawl, where the reader clearly switched from beer to coffee. The British Library, Hess' copy of Hobbes' Leviathan, bears an infamous note in the back. Finish this at 4 a.m. by candlelight with 6 cups of mocha god, help my soul and my landlord's patience. Printers adapted quickly to coffee culture. Morning editions gained popularity as printers realized caffeine-craving patrons would pay premiums for fresh, reading material with their first cup. The Courier Coffee House in Paris installed a press in its back room to produce instant rebuttals during live political debates, an enlightenment precursor to real-time comment threads. Some broadsheets even included suggested drink pairings, to be read with a medium roast, or best absorbed with black coffee and silence. The demands of the coffeehouse even altered the material structure of books. Printers near major coffee hubs began producing spill-resistant editions, wider margins, heavier paper, tighter stitching. A 1723 order from a Leipzig cafe calls for quires that shall bear the weight of a steaming pot without becoming transparent. Venetian shops experimented with coffee-tinted ink, ensuring that future stains would blend artistically into the page, the birth of the aesthetic we now call vintage. Your fingertips notice the subtle difference between these books and their quieter cousins. Coffeehouse volumes possess a unique patina, slightly stiff pages from repeated drying, warped spines from being passed around crowded tables. Some show what collectors call debate damage, four-edge dents where readers grip the book tightly during impassioned arguments. The New York Public Library holds a copy of Rousseau's Social Contract with wine stains on the first half and coffee rings on the second, a perfect timeline of the Enlightenment's transition from noble salons to bourgeois coffeehouses. Even type design evolved under the influence of coffee. Printers catering to bleary-eyed, caffeinated audiences began favoring fonts with greater legibility and dim rooms. Caslin's typeface, famous for its clarity and warmth, thrived in this environment, its generous counters and sturdy serifs remaining readable on the third or fourth cup. Some presses added tiny coffee bean symbols in their decorative fleurons, a typographic wink to their audience. As you leaf through an 18th century periodical, the reading behavior of caffeine societies starts to resemble modern digital life. Marginal notes in multiple hands form lively dialogues, sometimes spanning decades. Corners are turned down to mark must-read passages. Certain articles have been cut out entirely, likely shared with others. The Bodleian Library contains at least 30 books where patrons added blank pages to extend debates, creating hybrid volumes that bulge with commentary, the analog equivalent of comment threads and reposts. The rise of coffeehouse culture also influenced the economics of print. Cafe owners often acted as informal distributors, offering newspapers alongside their menu and even renting reading materials by the hour. A reader might pay 1 penny for a paper and another for a seat by the fire. Some establishments maintained clipping files, so patrons could trace ongoing debates over multiple visits. These practices laid the groundwork for public libraries and newsstands alike. Coffee even shaped intellectual tone. While the wine-fueled treatises of earlier centuries often drifted into mysticism or melancholy, the writings of the coffee era emphasized clarity, wit, and engagement. Essays became shorter, sharper, more conversational. Periodicals like The Spectator flourished in this space, with readers debating each day's installment over their morning brew and then sending letters to the editor, printed echo of the previous day's argument. The steam rising from your cup today mirrors the vapors that once wreathed the air of those early coffeehouses, carrying the scent of revolution. Their patrons couldn't have imagined their ringed and rumpled volumes would become prized historical artifacts, just as we rarely imagine how future historians might read the bookmarks in our browsers. And yet the cycle endures. Where ideas flourish, coffee follows, a bitter, aromatic witness to the evolution of thought. In a world shaped by print, coffee houses provided its pulse. They were more than social spaces. They were engines of discourse, forums of dissent, crucibles where ink met adrenaline. From their cluttered tables came the ferment that would birth encyclopedias, challenge monarchies, and rewire philosophy. And though centuries have passed, the pattern remains. We drink, we read, we share. 1 cup, 1 thought, 1 printed page at a time. Your thumb brushes against the edge of a centuries-old page, feeling the slight ridge where some forgotten reader once pressed their pen too deeply into the paper. The margins teem with life, not just the neat Latin glosses of scholars, but doodles, calculations, snippets of gossip, shopping lists, and the occasional frustrated outburst crawling like vines around the printed text. These are the fingerprints of minds at work, subconscious artifacts from a time before books were clean. Impersonal objects. What printers once produced as uniform, replicable editions, readers transformed into deeply personal artifacts, each copy bearing the unique scars and flourishes of its journey through dozens of hands. The hierarchy of marginal notes tells its own layered story. At the top of the page, in careful humanist script, a theologian dissects the passage with scholastic precision. Below, in a looser hand, a student complains about tuition costs and cold dormitories. In the gutter, almost invisible, a crude sketch of the professor with donkey ears or an obscene pun completes the tableau. These annotations form a kind of archaeological dig of attention span sacred and profane thought, coexisting on the same parchment. Modern imaging technology has even revealed how certain scribes preemptively left wider borders on pages where they anticipated readers would have more to say. Not surprisingly, the most generous margins consistently appear beside passages about sex, heresy, or taxation, the early modern equivalents of internet comment sections. You pause over a particularly intriguing volume, a 15th century arithmetic textbook whose margins have been repurposed into a gambling ledger. Neat columns. Record bets on everything from dice games to the outcomes of local elections. The calculations become increasingly desperate, the sums larger, the writing more agitated, until they abruptly stop on folio. 4-3V. In their place appears a hastily scrawled prayer for divine intervention. Whether the gambler found salvation or destitution remains a mystery, but the paper preserved their private reckoning, Balancing equations between probability and faith, printers initially resisted these intrusions. They saw marginalia as a violation of their meticulously composed layouts. Early printed books often included stern warnings against annotating the text, some even invoking spiritual consequences for defacing sacred works. Yet, as the Reformation gained momentum and theological debate spilled into everyday life, margins became contested ground. A Geneva Bible in the Folger collection contains 3 generations of commentary Catholic, Protestant, then Catholic again, each writing over the last, like a theological palimpsest. The most animated debates, however, weren't always theological. The most defaced pages are often found in cookbooks, where readers scribbled rival spice proportions or argued about the correct preparation of eel, sometimes in the same breath. As debating transubstantiation, the materials themselves reveal tensions between official printing and personal annotation. Iron gall ink standard for both professional and amateur scribes behaved differently based on who mixed it. Printer's ink, standardized and carefully applied, bonded with the paper cleanly and durably. Reader's ink, often mixed from hand. Hock materials like rusty nails and oak galls varied wildly in acidity and viscosity. Some marginal notes gradually ate through the paper like slow-burning fire. Others faded to the edge of invisibility, requiring ultraviolet light to resurrect. These effects create the phenomenon of ghost marginalia comments that flicker into view only under specific lighting, haunting the page like spectral arguments. You run your finger across what first appears to be a casual floral doodle. On closer inspection, the petals form astrological glyphs Aries, Leo, Gemini each, precisely placed. Renaissance readers often camouflaged forbiddance or esoteric knowledge within innocent-looking sketches. A botanically perfect drawing of mandrake might conceal instructions for summoning spirits. A floor plan of a cathedral might encode a calendar to calculate Easter independently of church authority. The most sophisticated marginal cryptographies employed the printed text itself as part of the cipher, using underlines and symbols to spell hidden messages through acrostics, invisible to the casual observer. The evolution of the margin from scholarly workspace to personal playground mirrors the broadening of literacy and reading itself. In early monastic texts, marginalia were strictly analytical, cross-references, corrections, alternate translations. But as books moved into homes, shops, and public coffeehouses, their margins filled with grocery lists, love poems, children's drawings, and snippets of folk songs. A Venetian merchant's ledger contains records of silk shipments interspersed with his daughter's Latin vocabulary drills. The British Library holds a copy of Euclid's Elements where a 16th century reader practiced their signature hundreds. Of times in the back matter, transforming mathematical treatise into a shrine to personal achievement. Some of the most poignant examples of marginalia come from books that survived disaster. A Nuremberg chronicle, rescued from a library fire, bears smoke-stained pages where someone tried to wash off soot, their fingerprints permanently etched into the warped paper. A sailor's prayer book recovered from the wreck of the Mary Rose contains salt-bloated annotations tracking weather conditions that stop abruptly on the day of the ship's sinking. These accidental memorials remind us that books don't just preserve ideas. They also bear witness to lives lived alongside them, carrying the echoes of human fragility. Your hand brushes a scrap of parchment folded between 2 pages, a forgotten letter, used as a makeshift bookmark. The ink has soaked through and left a mirror image on the adjacent leaf. It is a message never meant to be part of the text, yet now fused with it forever. This is the enduring lesson of marginalia. No book remains pristine. To read is to leave a trace. From the scholar's refined gloss to the child's clumsy scrawl, from careful theological correction to bored doodles of dancing bears, these marks are more than graffiti. They are a dialogue with the printed word, a conversation across time that the printing press promised uniformity. Its creators dreamed of perfect replication, each copy an identical twin to the next. But readers restless, flawed, imaginative insisted on individuality. In every margin lies the evidence of this quiet rebellion. The type may be fixed, but the experience of reading never is. What survives isn't just the official text, but the messy, beautiful, contradictory human response to it, one ink blot, one exclamation point, one footnote at a time. Your thumb brushes against the edge of a centuries-old page, feeling the slight ridge where some forgotten reader once pressed their pen too deeply into the paper. The margins teem with life, not just the neat Latin glosses of scholars, but doodles, calculations, snippets of gossip, shopping lists, musical notations, astrological tables, and the occasional frustrated outburst crawling like vines around the printed text. These are the fingerprints of minds at work, subconscious artifacts, from a time before books were clean, impersonal objects. What printers once produced as uniform, replicable editions, readers transformed into deeply personal artifacts, each copy bearing the unique scars and flourishes of its journey through dozens of hands. The hierarchy of marginal notes tells its own layered story. At the top of the page, in careful humanist script, a theologian dissects the passage with scholastic precision. Below, in a looser hand, a student complains about tuition costs and cold dormitories. In the gutter, almost invisible, a crude sketch of the professor with donkey ears or an obscene pun completes the tableau. These annotations form a kind of archaeological dig of attention, span sacred and profane thought, coexisting on the same parchment. Modern imaging technology has even revealed how certain scribes preemptively left wider borders on pages where they anticipated readers would have more to say. Not surprisingly, the most generous margins consistently appear beside passages about sex, heresy, or taxation, the early modern equivalents of internet comment sections. You pause over a particularly intriguing volume, a 15th century arithmetic textbook, whose margins have been repurposed into a gambling ledger. Neat columns. Record bets on everything from dice games to the outcomes of local elections. The calculations become increasingly desperate, the sums larger, the writing more agitated, until they abruptly stop on folio 4-3V. In their place appears a hastily scrawled prayer for divine intervention. Whether the gambler found salvation or destitution remains a mystery, but the paper preserved their private reckoning, balancing equations between probability and faith. Nearby pages record a different kind of calculation, a merchant's estimates of profit margins from spice shipments, suggesting the book may have passed through several hands and lives. Printers initially resisted these intrusions. They saw marginalia as a violation of their meticulously composed layouts. Early printed books often included stern warnings against annotating the text, some even invoking spiritual consequences for defacing sacred works. Yet, as the Reformation gained momentum and theological debate spilled into everyday life, margins became contested ground. A Geneva Bible in the Folger collection contains 3 generations of commentary Catholic, Protestant, then Catholic again, each writing over the last like a theological palimpsest. The most animated debates, however, weren't always theological. The most defaced pages are often found in cookbooks, where readers scribbled rival spice proportions or argued about the correct preparation of eel, sometimes in the same breath. As debating transubstantiation, the materials themselves reveal tensions between official printing and personal annotation. Iron gall ink standard for both professional and amateur scribes behaved differently based on who mixed it. Printer's ink, standardized and carefully applied, bonded with the paper cleanly and durably. Reader's ink, often mixed from ad hoc materials like rusty nails and oak galls, varied wildly in acidity and viscosity. Some marginal notes gradually ate through the paper like slow-burning fire. Others faded to the edge of invisibility, requiring ultraviolet light to resurrect. These effects create the phenomenon of ghost marginalia comments that flicker into view only under specific lighting, haunting the page like spectral arguments. You run your finger across what first appears to be a casual floral doodle. On closer inspection, the petals form astrological glyph series, Leo, Gemini each, precisely placed. Renaissance readers often camouflaged forbiddance or esoteric knowledge within innocent-looking sketches. A botanically perfect drawing of mandrake might conceal instructions for summoning spirits. A floor plan of a cathedral might encode a calendar to calculate Easter independently of church authority. The most sophisticated marginal cryptographies employed the printed text itself as part of the cipher, using underlines and symbols to spell hidden messages through acrostics, invisible to the casual observer. Some books even embedded numerological patterns, suggesting the margins were not just spaces for notes, but for codes and secrets meant only for initiates. The evolution of the margin, from scholarly workspace to personal playground, mirrors the broadening of literacy and reading itself. In early monastic texts, marginalia were strictly analytical. Cross-references, corrections, alternate translations. But as books moved into homes, shops, and public coffeehouses, their margins filled with grocery lists, love poems, children's drawings, and snippets of folk songs. A Venetian merchant's ledger contains records of silk shipments interspersed with his daughter's Latin vocabulary drills. The British Library holds a copy of Euclid's Elements where a 16th century reader practiced their signature hundreds of times in the back matter, transforming mathematical treatise into a shrine to personal achievement. In one Dutch Bible, a young woman recorded her courtship, noting each verse she and her future husband had read together, her own spiritual romance novel hidden in the white space. Some of the most poignant examples of marginalia come from books that survived disaster. A Nuremberg chronicle, rescued from a library fire, bears smoke-stained pages where someone tried to wash off soot, their fingerprints permanently etched into the warped paper. A sailor's prayer book recovered from the wreck of the Mary Rose contains salt-bloated annotations tracking weather conditions that stop abruptly on the day of the ship's sinking. A plague year almanac features entries scrawled in uneven hands, tracking the deaths of loved ones, crossing names off family rosters. These accidental memorials remind us that books don't just preserve ideas, they also bear witness to lives lived alongside them, carrying the echoes of human fragility. Your hand brushes a scrap of parchment folded between two pages, a forgotten letter, used as a makeshift bookmark. The ink has soaked through and left a mirror image on the adjacent leaf. It is a message never meant to be part of the text, yet now fused with it forever. Elsewhere, a feather pressed flat in the binding tells of a reader's outdoor session interrupted, a token left behind. This is the enduring lesson of marginalia. No book remains pristine. To read is to leave a trace. From the scholar's refined gloss to the child's clumsy scrawl, from careful theological correction to bored doodles of dancing bears, these marks are more than graffiti. They are a dialogue with the printed word, a conversation across time. The printing press promised uniformity. Its creators dreamed of perfect replication, each copy an identical twin to the next. But readers restless, flawed, imaginative insisted on individuality. In every margin lies the evidence of this quiet rebellion. The type may be fixed, but the experience of reading never is. What survives isn't just the official text, but the messy, beautiful, contradictory human response to it, one ink blot, one exclamation point, one footnote at a time. Your thumb brushes against the edge of a centuries-old page, feeling the slight ridge where some forgotten reader once pressed their pen too deeply into the paper. The margins teem with life, not just the neat Latin glosses of scholars, but doodles, calculations, snippets of gossip, shopping lists, Musical notations, astrological tables, and the occasional frustrated outburst, crawling like vines around the printed text. These are the fingerprints of minds at work, subconscious artifacts, from a time before books were clean, impersonal objects. What printers once produced as uniform, replicable editions, readers transformed into deeply personal artifacts, each copy bearing the unique scars and flourishes of its journey through dozens of hands. The hierarchy of marginal notes tells its own layered story. At the top of the page, in careful humanist script, a theologian dissects the passage with scholastic precision. Below, in a looser hand, a student complains about tuition costs and cold dormitories. In the gutter, almost invisible, a crude sketch of the professor with donkey ears, or an obscene pun, completes the tableau. These annotations form a kind of archaeological dig of attention span sacred and profane thought, coexisting on the same parchment. Modern imaging technology has even revealed how certain scribes preemptively left wider borders on pages where they anticipated readers would have more to say. Not surprisingly, the most generous margins consistently appear beside passages about sex, heresy, or taxation, the early modern equivalents of internet comment sections. You pause over a particularly intriguing volume, a 15th century arithmetic textbook, whose margins have been repurposed into a gambling ledger. Neat columns. Record bets on everything from dice games to the outcomes of local elections. The calculations become increasingly desperate, the sums larger, the writing more agitated, until they abruptly stop on folio 43V. In their place appears a hastily scrawled prayer for divine intervention. Whether the gambler found salvation or destitution remains a mystery, but the paper preserved their private reckoning, balancing equations between probability and faith. Nearby pages record a different kind of calculation, a merchant's estimates of profit margins from spice shipments, suggesting the book may have passed through several hands and lives. Printers initially resisted these intrusions. They saw marginalia as a violation of their meticulously composed layouts. Early printed books often included stern warnings against annotating the text, some even invoking spiritual consequences for defacing sacred works. Yet, as the Reformation gained momentum and theological debate spilled into everyday life, margins became contested ground. A Geneva Bible in the Folger collection contains 3 generations of commentary Catholic, Protestant, then Catholic again, each writing over the last like a theological palimpsest. The most animated debates, however, weren't always theological. The most defaced pages are often found in cookbooks, where readers scribbled rival spice proportions or argued about the correct preparation of eel, sometimes in the same breath, as debating transubstantiation. The materials themselves reveal tensions between official printing and personal annotation. Iron gall ink standard for both professional and amateur scribes behaved differently based on who mixed it. Printer's ink, standardized and carefully applied, bonded with the paper cleanly and durably. Reader's ink, often mixed from ad hoc materials like rusty nails and oak galls, varied wildly in acidity and viscosity. Some marginal notes gradually ate through the paper like slow-burning fire. Others faded to the edge of invisibility, requiring ultraviolet light to resurrect. These effects create the phenomenon of ghost marginalia comments that flicker into view only under specific lighting, haunting the page like spectral arguments. You run your finger across what first appears to be a casual floral doodle. On closer inspection, the petals form astrological glyph series, Leo, Gemini each, precisely placed. Renaissance readers often camouflage forbiddance or esoteric knowledge within innocent-looking sketches. A botanically perfect drawing of mandrake might conceal instructions for summoning spirits. A floor plan of a cathedral might encode a calendar to calculate Easter independently of church authority. The most sophisticated marginal cryptographies employed the printed text itself as part of the cipher, using underlines and symbols to spell hidden messages through acrostics, invisible to the casual observer. Some books even embedded numerological patterns, suggesting the margins were not just spaces for notes, but for codes and secrets meant only for initiates. The evolution of the margin from scholarly workspace to personal playground mirrors the broadening of literacy and reading itself. In early monastic texts, marginalia were strictly analytical: cross-references, corrections, alternate translations. But as books moved into homes, shops, and public coffeehouses, their margins filled with grocery lists, love poems, children's drawings, and snippets of folk songs. A Venetian merchant's ledger contains records of silk shipments interspersed with his daughter's Latin vocabulary drills. The British Library holds a copy of Euclid's Elements where a 16th century reader practiced the signature hundreds of times in the back matter, transforming mathematical treatise into a shrine to personal achievement. In one Dutch Bible, a young woman recorded her courtship, noting each verse she and her future husband had read together, her own spiritual romance novel hidden in the white space. Some of the most poignant examples of marginalia come from books that survived disaster. A Nuremberg chronicle, rescued from a library fire, bears smoke-stained pages where someone tried to wash off soot, their fingerprints permanently etched into the warped paper. A sailor's prayer book recovered from the wreck of the Mary Rose contains salt-bloated annotations tracking weather conditions that stop abruptly on the day of the ship's sinking. A plague year almanac features entries scrawled in uneven hands, tracking the deaths of loved ones, crossing names off family rosters. These accidental memorials remind us that books don't just preserve ideas, they also bear witness to lives lived alongside them, carrying the echoes of human fragility. Your hand brushes a scrap of parchment folded between two pages, a forgotten letter used as a makeshift bookmark. The ink has soaked through and left a mirror image on the adjacent leaf. It is a message never meant to be part of the text, yet now fused with it forever. Elsewhere, a feather pressed flat in the binding tells of a reader's outdoor session interrupted. A token left behind. You open another volume and find a page where a child has traced letters over the printed lines. An early exercise in learning, turning the book into both teacher and witness. This is the enduring lesson of marginalia. No book remains pristine. To read is to leave a trace. From the scholar's refined gloss to the child's clumsy scrawl, from careful theological correction to bored doodles of dancing bears, these marks are more than graffiti. They are a dialogue with the printed word, a conversation across time. The printing press promised uniformity. Its creators dreamed of perfect replication, each copy an identical twin to the next. But readers restless, flawed, imaginative insisted on individuality. In every margin lies the evidence of this quiet rebellion. The type may be fixed, but the experience of reading never is. What survives isn't just the official text, but the messy, beautiful, contradictory human response to it. One ink blot, one exclamation point, one footnote at a time. Your fingertip hesitates over the vellum page, tracing the unfamiliar contours of a revolutionary concept taking shape before you. An alphabetical list of topics with corresponding page numbers. This seemingly mundane innovation, the index, would prove more subversive than any heretical text. In a world where knowledge had always unfolded in linear, authoritative progression, the index handed readers the keys to the kingdom, allowing them to approach wisdom sideways, backwards, or in whatever order they pleased. The printing press had given Europe books. The index gave readers mastery over them. Early books resisted random access with every fiber of their being. Medieval manuscripts followed carefully prescribed order scriptures preceding commentary, chronicles moving strictly chronologically, scientific texts progressing from general principles to specific applications. To consult such works required either memorization or laborious linear searching. A 13th century scholar's complaint still echoes in university libraries. I spend more hours hunting than thinking. My life wasted turning pages like a miller grinding empty air. The first tentative indexes appeared in legal and medical texts, where quick reference meant the difference between justice and error, life and death. These prototype indexes functioned more like modern glossaries, small clusters of terms grouped by concept rather than strict alphabetization. You examine a 1483 printed copy of Aquinas' Summa Theologica, its margins bristling with strange symbols manicules, pointing hands, paragraph markers, inked crosses. These are the scars of a text being forcibly opened to nonlinear reading. The printer has added something revolutionary, a dual indexing system combining alphabetical order with theological. Hierarchy. Abortion appears between angels and avarice, but also carries a tiny cross indicating its treatment under mortal sins. This hybrid approach acknowledges how difficult breaking the linear mindset proved. Contemporary letters reveal scholars complaining about alphabetical order being against nature's flow, with one German monk arguing it placed Zeno before Adam, zebras before saints. The physical construction of early indexes reveals their struggle for acceptance. Many appear on separate quires that could be removed if the owner preferred the traditional experience. Some printers use different paper for index pages, making them visually distinct from the real text. The most telling examples are indexes bound at the back of books, but with blank pages, facing them space left for readers to add their own organizational systems if they found the printer's approach lacking. A Venetian volume from 1502 contains 3 competing indexes bound together, one alphabetical, one thematic, and one following the order of church liturgy, as if the printer couldn't decide which would offend fewest buyers. Indexes transformed reading habits in ways we've forgotten. Where medieval scholars often memorized entire texts to facilitate quick reference, a practice called artificial memory, printed indexes allowed direct access to specific passages. This shifted intellectual emphasis from retention to retrieval, from internalizing knowledge to navigating it. The change provoked backlash. One 1512 sermon decried indexes as the lazy man's path to wisdom that would produce half-educated fools who know where to find ideas but not how to sustain them. Ironically, these criticisms were themselves indexed in subsequent editions, making them easier to reference and rebut. You discover a particularly ingenious example of index as propaganda. In a 1526 Lutheran Bible, the index not only lists topics, but cross-references related doctrinal debates, effectively creating a theological roadmap for Reformation arguments. Catholic authorities quickly recognized the danger in indexed. Bible allowed lay people to construct their own interpretations rather than following priestly guidance. The Council of Trent later banned unauthorized indexes entirely, declaring them more dangerous than the heresies they organize. Some surviving censored books show indexes carefully cut out, leaving only stubs like removed stitches in the binding. The index's democratizing power extended beyond religion. Cookbooks began appearing with indexed recipes, breaking from the old practice of organizing by ingredient availability or feast days. Medical texts separated diseases from treatments, allowing both physicians and desperate families to locate information quickly. Most revolutionary were indexed legal codes suddenly. Citizens could look up laws themselves rather than relying on lawyers' interpretations. A 1538 French ordinance tried banning indexed legal texts, complaining they caused commoners to debate points beyond their station. Modern digital searching has made us forget how radical the index truly was. Before alphabetical organization, information retrieval required understanding a text's internal logic, its narrative flow, its authors. Priorities. The index severed this connection, treating knowledge as discrete packets to be accessed on demand. A 1497 herbal in the British Library shows this transition mid-stride its first edition organized plants by medicinal use. The revised version, by alphabetical order with cross-references. The same plants now existed in two completely different conceptual universes. As you flip between index and text, the revolutionary nature of this tool becomes clear. The printing press had promised everyone access to books, but the index promised everyone their own path through them. In those carefully ordered lists of topics and page numbers lay the seeds of modern information science, hypertext, even search algorithms. What began as a simple finding aid became a new way of thinking, nonlinear, customizable, personal. The index didn't just help readers navigate books. It taught us that knowledge could be reordered to suit individual needs rather than institutional dogma. The crucible's molten contents shimmer like liquid midnight, its surface reflecting the distorted faces of gathered apprentices as you stir the alloy with an iron rod. This is the printer's true philosopher's stone, a carefully guarded mixture of lead, tin, and antimony, destined to solidify into the very letters of the alphabet. The air in the workshop carries the scent of burning oil, scorched cloth, and something unmistakably ancient, the alchemical tang of transmutation. While kings and alchemists spent centuries failing to turn base metals into gold, Gutenberg and his successors found a more valuable miracle, transforming molten scrap into the vessels of human thought. Casting type required more than technical skill. It demanded a near-magical mastery over contradiction. The alloy needed to be soft enough to pour cleanly into tiny, intricate molds at low temperatures, yet hard enough to endure the punishing pressure of thousands of impressions. Early printers pursued this paradox through often disastrous experimentation. Recipes included strange additives, ground glass, vinegar, soot, even urine in desperate attempts to achieve the perfect balance. A 1478 Nuremberg inventory records 3 barrels of metal lost to foolish mixtures, and payment to the physician for the apprentice with the swollen tongue. It was antimony that finally brought order to the chaos. When blended properly, it lent the alloy a crispness and durability that transformed printing into a repeatable craft. Venetian founders called it spirito di caratere, the soul of the letter, and guarded their supply lines. Like state secrets, you lift a freshly cast piece from the mold, a lowercase e, the most common letter in Latin print. Still warm, its silvery surface bears the faint sheen of a successful pour. Under magnification, the alloy's crystalline matrix reveals its engineered complexity. Tin crystals suspended in a lead sea, laced together by threads of antimony. Metallurgists have since confirmed that Europe's finest print shops converged on nearly identical ratios, roughly 60% lead, 30% tin, 10% antimony. This standardization allowed journeymen to move between workshops with confidence. Their skills transferable across cities and languages. The casting process bordered on ritual. Apprentices learned to judge temperature not by thermometer, but by sight, cherry red for sermons, hell glow for psalters, according to one 16th century manual. The best founders worked before dawn, when ambient temperatures provided consistent casting conditions. A Lion Workshop leisure from 1501 tracks miscasts by hour with a warning scrawled in the margin. After the Angelus, only demons and bad sorts emerge. The introduction of iron molds in the late 15th century revolutionized the process, allowing for tighter tolerances and higher speeds. Traditionalists, however, complained that iron castings lacked the warmth and character of brass-borne types. Metallurgical nostalgia for a more artisanal past. In a printer's world, nothing was wasted. Worn-out sorts, miscasts, even broken letter forms were collected in crucibles and returned to molten form. This recyclability had implications beyond economy. When printers melted down unpopular text to reuse the type, they ensured those ideas vanished not just from shelves, but from physical memory. A 1492 letter from a Mainz printer boasts of rendering 3 heretical volumes back into dumb metal after a church crackdown. It is perhaps no surprise that surviving examples of early type are so rare most were reborn, page by page, into safer editions. Yet metal forgets nothing. Modern historians use trace element analysis to link surviving books to their type origins. A 2015 study matched arsenic traces in a Strasbourg edition of Horace to a contaminated tin shipment, logged in municipal records. This forensic printing history allows scholars to date editions previously lost in anonymity, revealing the movement of materials and ideas across time and borders. But the glinting alloy bore a heavy cost. Lead poisoning known in Italy as mal destampatori, the printer's sickness, took a quiet toll on generations of craftsmen. Symptoms ranged from trembling hands and memory loss to hallucinations and madness. Workshops tried folk remedies, garlic-infused wine, milk-soaked cloth masks, but most merely accepted the danger. Ledger books often included allowances for replacement of compositors, a chilling euphemism for the dead or incapacitated. The erratic behavior of some prominent printers, Johannes Petri of Basel, among them, may have stemmed as much from metal toxicity as from artistic temperament. Examine a damaged uppercase. Its crossbar visibly slumped from decades of use. Even in failure, the piece retains value. Printers saved every scrap for the pot. The communal sorting of worn and fresh type created unexpected social records. Analysis of workshop floors has uncovered tiny ecosystems of labor, where women and children often handled sorting and recycling duties. In some cities, laws banned children under 10 from type founding due to the metal dust, though enforcement was rare got, as the furnace's orange glow fades and ingots cool into usable bars. Process starts again. One by one, apprentices pour the alloy into molds, watch it cool, and file the edges smooth. The shop cat, perched high on a rafter to avoid the poison-laden dust, watches impassively. There is poetry in the cycle, soft lead hardened with brittle. Antimony, forged into tools of literacy and rebellion. If the printing press was Gutenberg's visible revolution, then this humble alloy was its invisible foundation, turning not base metal into gold, but thought into permanence, ignorance into dialogue, silence into speech-type metal like the human. Ideas it carried lived many lives. What began as ore buried in the earth became word, became waste, became word again. Each letter that passed through the mold bore not only a sound, but a history of chemistry and craft, of failure and resilience. The letters that outlasted empires did so not because they were noble, but because they were useful, durable, cast to endure. That is the final paradox of this strange, shimmering alloy. It was always meant to be temporary, yet somehow became eternal. The acrid scent of charred vellum still lingers in the air as you run your fingers along the edge of a salvaged manuscript. Its pages uneven, where flames once licked, then retreated. This book shouldn't exist by all rights. It should have joined the countless others reduced to smoke and ash in the great library burnings of history. And yet, here it rests in your hands, a testament to the stubborn resilience of the printed word. The printing press created an unexpected paradox. The more efficiently books could be produced, the harder they became to erase. Like the mythical phoenix, libraries consumed by fire often found ways to rise again, their contents preserved in scattered fragments across time and geography. The fragility of early printed books belied their surprising durability as a cultural force. A single spark could reduce a printer's entire inventory to ash in minutes. Print shops were notorious fire traps, filled with flammable paper and open flames for heating type metal. Yet the very technology that made books vulnerable also made them replicable. Where the destruction of the Library of Alexandria meant the permanent loss of unique texts, the burning of a Renaissance print shop was a temporary setback so long. As a single copy survived somewhere else, the book could be resurrected. This fundamental shift in textual survival changed the stakes of preservation forever. You turn the warped cover of a water-stained volume rescued from the 1562 Heidelberg library sack, its pages still legible beneath the tide marks. When Catholic troops looted the Bibliotheca Palatina, quick-thinking scholars smuggled hundreds of books to safety by any means possible, hidden in carts of grain, sewn into clothing, floated down the Neckar River in barrels. These volumes wear their survival like armor. Mud stains, ink runs, and salt lines bear witness to the chaos they endured. And yet modern conservationists had discovered something remarkable. These damaged books often outlasted pristine ones. Water had washed away acidic residues, and river mud sometimes created an alkaline buffer that slowed decay. The 30 Years' War, devastating in its human toll, paradoxically preserved texts through unlikely acts of cross-confessional protection. Protestant works found refuge in Catholic monasteries, their contents shielded not by agreement, but by scholarly respect. In one recently uncovered Bavarian cache, Lutheran tracts had been rebound in Catholic covers, their title pages subtly altered to avoid detection. What surprised historians most were the marginal annotations left by their custodians, Catholic monks, thoughtfully engaging with opposing theological views. A Benedictine scribe wrote beside a passage in a Calvinist text, though he errs on the mystery of transubstantiation, his critique of clerical wealth is just. Printers, ever pragmatic, responded to the threat of censorship and fire with strategic distribution. Key works were printed concurrently in multiple cities, Basel, Venice, Paris, to create geographic redundancy. This early version of backup storage made complete eradication nearly impossible. Erasmus arranged for his books to be published simultaneously in various centers of learning, ensuring at least one edition would survive political crackdowns or urban fires. Modular books also emerged, volumes in which controversial sections were detachable, allowing printers to adapt to local sensitivities without discarding the entire work. Sometimes, even paper chemistry worked in favor of survival. A 17th century Spanish shipwreck revealed a trove of waterlogged books, their pages limp but legible. Seawater had erased much of the ink, but not all. Iron gall ink, common for writing, had chemically bonded with the cellulose in the paper, forming a durable stain. These texts, thought lost beneath the waves, re-emerged centuries later with their contents ghosted permanently into the paper itself. In contrast, more modern carbon-based inks had simply vanished, proving less resilient in the face of natural disaster. You unfold a fire-blackened broadsheet, its corners crumbling at your touch. The heat has made the paper brittle, yet preserved the ink in a strange alchemy. Conservators call this phenomenon the baptism of fire, where age might cause ink to fade or flake. Controlled burning sometimes fixes it more permanently. Some libraries now use this knowledge to create heat-treated reference copies from surplus. Editions fire-hardened artifacts that can withstand handling even as originals are carefully stored. The practice echoes medieval techniques, when monks singed parchment edges to prevent curling and fraying. Even more haunting are the so-called ghost libraries collections lost to fire, pillage, or decay, but now reconstructed through fragments. The famed library of Matthias Corvinus, king of Hungary, was largely destroyed in 1526. Yet over centuries, individual volumes have surfaced across Europe, identified by Corvinus's distinctive raven emblem. A scientific manuscript turned up in Vienna, once used as binding for a newer book. A devotional text was found lining a trunk in Prague. Each rediscovered volume is a thread in a larger tapestry, slowly reweaving the lost fabric of a once great library. As you slide the damaged book back onto the shelf, its spine crackles softly, a whisper of the fires it endured. There's no grand ex libris, no gilded coat of arms, only the quiet dignity of survival. This volume was preserved not by royalty or scholars, but by ordinary people who valued it enough to hide it, carry it, risk punishment, or worse, to pass it along. The press may have promised permanence, but it was human hands that delivered it. These texts endured because someone, somewhere, believed they were worth saving. And so, the story of the printed word is not only one of innovation, but of resilience. Through war, fire, flood, and decay, books have passed from hand to hand, generation to generation, sometimes damaged, often transformed, but rarely forgotten. The fragility of paper has been outweighed by the durability of meaning. What survives today are not just pages and bindings, but echoes of human courage, curiosity, and conviction, proof that even in our most destructive moments, we carry within the instinct to preserve, to protect, and to pass on. Close the book gently. Let the memory of its pages settle in your mind. Somewhere, a press lies silent, its type cool and still. But the words remain, waiting for the next hand to lift them from ash and shadow and bring them back to light. The glow of your screen washes over the printed page as you toggle between a digitized incunabulum and its physical counterpart. The two forms of the same text, one centuries old, the other born moments ago, exist in quiet harmony. They are separated by time, but united in purpose. This strange convergence of the material and the digital is the natural continuation of the revolution that began in a humble workshop in Mainz. There, in the 15th century, Johannes Gutenberg gave the world movable type, and in doing so, laid the foundation for something far grander than he could have foreseen. Every pixel on your screen, every cursor blinking in rhythm with your thoughts, owes its existence to those early letters cast in lead. The transition from lead to light has unfolded so gradually that we hardly noticed. First came photographic, facsimiles, black and white reproductions that allowed scholars to study rare manuscripts without risking damage to fragile originals. Then microfilm condensed entire libraries into drawers of glinting celluloid, each reel a repository of forgotten lore. And now, high-resolution scans offer us not only the text, but its entire physical context, the texture of laid paper, the shadows cast by deep impressions, even the smudges left behind by long-dead readers. In some cases, digital renderings of a page are more revealing than the original itself. A magnified image of a Gutenberg Bible page can show variances in ink density, the jagged edge of a worn typeface, and even the faint halo of a reader's breath if viewed under the right light. You zoom in on a single letter, a lowercase h. The digital enhancement reveals a tiny flaw, a nick in the stem, likely the result of a chip in the metal mold. This unique deformity becomes a fingerprint, allowing historians to trace that very piece of type across multiple editions printed in the same shop. These microscopic quirks have become invaluable tools. A project at MIT recently used multispectral imaging to determine which sheets of paper in a 15th century Psalter came from the same mold, revealing how a single book was printed in waves over several months. Such discoveries provide intimate insights into the rhythm and economics of early print shops, their output shaped as much by material availability as by demand. The digital cloud, it seems, offers a kind of preservation that medieval scribes could scarcely have imagined. Where they worried about worms and fire, we worry about file corruption and server decay. Our data is backed up, mirrored, encrypted, and scattered across the globe. And yet, this preservation is oddly fragile. A vellum codex stored on a monastery shelf for 500 years can still be read today with the naked eye. A PDF file, on the other hand, may require constant migration to new formats just to remain accessible. The irony is profound. We have created tools for eternal preservation, but those tools demand eternal attention. Archivists and preservationists now speak of a hybrid model, what some call the Gutenberg principle. According to this approach, physical books and digital surrogates are not competitors but collaborators. The digital version offers access, analysis, and replication. The physical version provides permanence, tangibility, and the irreplaceable feel of time. Together, they form a resilient archive, each medium shoring up the weaknesses of the other. Yet there remains a ghost between the original and its reproduction, an intangible quality that defies quantification. The feel of a printed page beneath your fingertips, the whisper of paper as it turns, the slight give of a well-read spine. These sensations anchor memory. Researchers at Stanford's Libraries of the Future lab have found measurable differences in comprehension and retention between physical and digital reading. Participants reading printed books remembered plot details better and reported higher emotional engagement. The spatial awareness that comes from holding a book knowing the passage was on the top left of a right-hand page. Perhaps 3/4 through creates cognitive anchors that screens cannot replicate. This sensory yearning may explain why. Even as we digitize millions of books, publishers continue producing lavish facsimile editions of illuminated manuscripts and early printed works. These objects do not merely transmit information, they invite contemplation. To hold a book printed in 1475 is to hold the breath of its maker, to feel the intentions of a compositor, the strength of a press, the patience of a binder. The digital file offers access. The printed object offers encounter. You dim your screen and return to the original book resting before you, its pages warm under your hand. The transition feels seamless, from cloud to cotton paper, from LED to linen rag. It is here, in this movement between mediums, that Gutenberg's legacy becomes clearest. His invention was never about replacing the old with the new. It was about enabling words to adapt, to find new vessels, to survive beyond the boundaries of any one material. From lead to silicon, from parchment to pixels, the written word has proven itself infinitely malleable. The essential miracle remains unchanged. A thought can be caught, encoded, and passed forward in time. When Gutenberg pressed his first type into dampened paper, he did not merely create a book. He created a system for extending memory across generations, for allowing voices to speak long after their owners had fallen silent. Close your eyes for a moment. Let the hum of your device and the stillness of the page blend into one. Hear the faint echo of a press falling silent in a 15th century workshop. Feel the weight of centuries not as a burden, but as a gift. The story continues, each chapter written with a new tool, each reader a fresh beginning. No idea ever truly vanishes. It only changes shape, waiting patiently for the next mind to find it. End of script. Sweet dreams.